Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. Night shift workers. Have you ever experienced something creepy or unexplainable or paranormal? Please remember to like, share, comment, hype, listen, and ask for shoutouts, and subscribe.
I used to intern in a recording studio in New York City years ago where it was technically open 24/7, meaning there was always someone there whether clients were in or not. Anyway, it was on an upper floor of a building, and due to the amount of expensive equipment inside, you could not access that floor by elevator without someone letting you up. The button for that floor was locked out, so you couldn't press it from inside the elevator. There was a camera at the front entrance downstairs, another at the elevator entrance, and one inside the elevator, all of which could be viewed from the front desk of the studio, so when people arrived you would buzz them in, wait until you saw them enter the elevator, and then you would have to push the button for the studio floor to bring the elevator up. Well, anyway, one of the nights I was working the overnight shift, and it was just me and another dude doing cleaning, maintenance, etc. When we hear the elevator start running at probably like 3:30 in the morning. The whole building is all offices, so really there is nobody in the building past 5 or 6 p.m. besides us. So we thought it was a bit strange. The other guy looks at the cameras, and there's nothing at all. No one in the elevator either. So, although it's weird, we just figure someone must still be in the building and called it from a different floor. It makes sense until all of a sudden we see it stop at our first floor and we hear the door ding. We're both in the lobby about 15 feet away from the elevator, and we give each other the hardest what the stare ever. I can't explain how much I didn't want those doors to open. We stare like a deer in headlights, completely motionless at the doors as they open. Nobody is there. No one pushed the button. Nothing. We both keep staring completely still and silent, and it becomes really fucking creepy as time goes on and the doors don't shut, as if something is standing in the doorway blocking the sensor. The doors usually close after 5 seconds or so, but we stared at it for a good 20 to 30 seconds or so. Before they closed, the elevator returned back to the lobby. We stared for a bit longer before simultaneously looking at each other and saying, "What the dude?" The next day we asked a couple of the other guys about it, and one of the guys said the same thing happened to him in the middle of the night when he was by himself. He said he almost himself. Maybe there's a logical explanation for it, elevator malfunction, etc., but it was really damn freaky, since the place was generally kinda creepy at night, and there had been some other weird things. I worked in a mine in northern Ontario. There was a death on the 42 level a couple years previous to the incident. It was a normal day underground like any other. We were rehabbing an old working that had collapsed. 42 level was big. The drifts were 6 by 6 feet, but go on for kilometers in every direction. It was about midnight when we saw the mine rescue team with security rushing down the drift. Naturally, we dropped what we were doing and followed to see if we could help. We arrived to a guy who was as pale as a ghost. He didn't look hurt, but he was shaking uncontrollably. Mine rescue approached him and he wouldn't have it. He would scream, and not just any scream. It was terrifying hearing the screams. Like a person so consumed with fear, it had a tone to it that you wouldn't imagine could come from a person. Eventually, he just stopped screaming and just sat there awake but non-responsive. By now it was 3:30 a.m. and our shift was over. We couldn't leave him down there. We managed to get him on a stretcher that we could carry out. On our way out, he kept saying the devil is on 42 over and over again. About 2 years later, another incident report was read to us. The exact same thing, exactly the same spot, but a different person. I don't believe they saw the devil, but it is always in the back of my mind when I'm on 42. Night watch in the barracks at Fort Gordon. That's a night shift, right? Anyway, So many things happened in 3 different rooms that I could write a book. It completely changed my belief in the paranormal activity. This one took place in the middle of the night, so this is one I'll tell. I'm sitting by the stairwell on the 2nd floor and hear someone shouting in a room down a hallway. I'm on duty, so I run to the room and swing open the door expecting to see some fighting. There are several people in this room, pointing up to the ceiling next to a wall and telling me they're doing it again. I ask them to explain, and they tell me that ever since they moved into that room, someone lifts up the ceiling tiles and makes funny faces at them at night. The latrine is on the other side of the wall, so I go over to see if anyone is there, and there isn't. So I climb onto a desk in the room to lift up the ceiling tiles to see if they're still up there. When I lift up the ceiling tiles, all I see is a cinder block wall that goes all the way to the floor above. There's only about an inch between the back of the ceiling tile and the wall. No way a face was there. 2 of the soldiers freaked out and ran out of the room and slept in the hallway. This was only the first of many incidents. Worked at a movie theater running the booths upstairs. The projectors are upstairs, obviously, in a long corridor. At night, after the last showing in each theater, you shut off the lights to that theater and the small one over the projector itself. Then you cover the platters to protect the dust. It's not so bad the first view, because at least the lights off nearby projectors are still on for the theaters that are still running. But as you shut each one off one by one, the corridor gets darker and darker, and that little viewing window into each individual theater is pitch black. That dull, steady whirring noise you've toned out all night is gone, and is now replaced by absolute silence, and there's hardly any light left anymore. Just lights at the end of each corridor, where you sit in between each start time. It's spooky enough, is what I'm saying. But one particular night, I'm throwing the covers over one of the platters and I casually glance up into the viewing theater window across the way, and there's a face. It's a little boy's face and it's sheet white. I know what I saw. I'm sure there's an explanation for it, and there's nothing supernatural about it, but there was a face there, and it scared the absolute shit out of me. It made an already unsettling environment that much more terrifying the rest of the time I worked there. Also, for the record, inside the actual theater, these windows are a solid 8 to 10 feet above the seat backs in the highest row. So, if someone was playing a prank, they'd need a ladder, and even then they'd have nowhere to set it. Not me, but a friend used to work as a night custodian for an elementary school, which the building itself was rather old, built in the 40s maybe. He was the 3rd shift guy, so he took over from 2nd shift guy at like 9 p.m. He was basically there to mop the floors and make sure no one broke in. If he got all of his stuff done, he was pretty much free to do whatever he wanted. Often, after he finished doing his work, he'd go hang out in an office because there was a small TV to watch. He said things started off innocently enough, lights turning on in classrooms where he knew they had been off previously, cabinets and doors opening and closing on their own. He didn't pay much attention to it at first. He was sort of on the fence as to where he believed in paranormal activities, so he just shrugged it off as coincidences. At first, he would go and check the noises out. Sometimes he'd creep around and try to catch someone in the act. Cabinets and doors closing on their own. He didn't pay much attention to it at first. He was sort of on the fence as to where he believed in paranormal activities, so he just shrugged it off as coincidences. At first, he would go and check the noises out. Sometimes he'd creep around and try to catch someone in the act, in case there was a way in that he didn't know about. After a month or so, he gave up looking and just learned to ignore it. He'd ask his boss about it and just get blown off. Over the coming months, things progressively got worse. Doors no longer closed on their own, they slammed shut. He heard noises like children playing, sometimes screaming. He'd find trash cans turned upside down. He'd have things thrown at him, but he would be clearly alone with nowhere for someone to hide and throw things at him. He'd contemplated quitting, but he was making good money for being nearly fresh out of high school, and he needed the money for family stuff, so he stuck with it. He'd come in, rush through his duties for the night as quickly as he could, and then go and sit in the office where he turned the TV to where he could sit facing the door, and that's where he'd sit until the morning crew came in at 6 a.m. He didn't want to admit that he was scaredless of being in that school by himself at night, so he tried to tough it out and made a lot of excuses to try and explain what was going on. The last straw for him was the night he was sitting in the office watching TV and felt someone grab the chair from behind and flip him over backwards. There was clearly no one in the room and no way for anyone to get into the room without him seeing them. He picked up the office phone and called his boss at home in the middle of the night, said he quit and he'd come back in the morning to turn the keys in. He was definitely a believer in the paranormal after that experience. He said that it wasn't until years later that he found out from someone who'd researched the history of the school before it was turned down, and that there used to be a pool inside the school. A number of kids had drowned in over the early years of the school until the administration decided to finally expand the building, so they filled the pool in with concrete and expand over the top of it.
Again, this is not me inviting anything into my life, but I've worked, the last 7 or 8 months, most nights inside of schools, inside of the New York City boroughs, and, including 11 p.m., 12 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in these schools where there's just a janitor and my crew and nothing, just quiet. So anyway, I'm sure it's out there, but keep skipping me. Anyway, have a great day.
I drive a late night limo shuttle service for my place of employ. One night I'm driving one of our limo style shuttles. I'm almost at the destination with just one couple in the back. They're a little buzzed and chit-chatting among themselves. The area of this destination is not a great neighborhood, so there's a lot of homeless and generally shady people wandering about all hours of the night, and I'm very used to seeing them. However, on this particular trip, I look over toward this little concrete island that has a yield sign on it. I see a figure covered in what looks like a raggedy cloak. Now, I'm still not alarmed because it's not uncommon to see homeless people throw blankets and such over their heads, and this was late October, so it was getting cooler at night. But then I notice how tall this person thing is. It is as tall as the yield sign, so it had to be 12 to 14 feet tall? Now, I'm in a bit of shock. Then I see the thing lift its arm up and point. The arm is unnaturally long and the skin is dark gray. It took everything in my power not to slam on my brakes and yell out, "What the f-?" But I don't think sending my loving couple flying onto the floor of the limo because I thought I saw the Grim Reaper would have gone over well with my manager. Speaking of the couple, they apparently didn't see it at all, and they were still enamored with whatever they were chatting about. I dropped them off, hurriedly did the paperwork, and zoomed back over to the area. It's only like a block from the club, and of course, whatever I saw was gone. Not night shift, just a regular dude. And I don't really believe in the paranormal, but I had this one thing happen that I have zero explanation for. I've also told this story on Reddit before. I was a teenager studying for major secondary school exams, so one weekend, my parents, brother, and grandparents went to a function, and I was home alone. For reference, because of the country I live in, our house has steel grills in the front of every door and window like a prison. My room is at the front of the house. It's something like 9:30 or 10 p.m. I head to the kitchen, which is at the opposite end of the house. It also houses the stairs to the second floor, which is where my parents' and brother's rooms are. As I'm getting something from the fridge, I hear my mom yell my name, so I say "coming" and start up the steps. 2 steps up, I remember that it makes no sense because I'm home alone. I call out to whatever and I hear my name again. That's so hard. I don't generally run, but I sprinted back to my room and locked the door. After a couple minutes, when I think I've lost my mind and was hearing things, I decided to head back to the kitchen. As I got to my door and to unlock it as if on cue, I hear footsteps in the passageway. Again, that. relock the door, grab something off my desk to defend myself, and hide under the bed. Footsteps stop at my door. Waited for damn near half an hour under the bed until my parents called to say they were almost home. Went to open up the place so they could get in, and nothing was unlocked or broken, so it sure as hell wasn't a person. It's roughly 12 or so years later, and I still have no clue what went on that night. Not a night shifter, but my dad kind of was. He was also against the idea of paranormal activity, but now agrees that sometimes there are things that cannot be explained. He was a college student, working towards his doctorate in dentistry. However, due to a school being expensive as hell, he had to live in a run-down apartment in the bad side of Philly. Ooh. As a result, he would occasionally wake up at night since he had to scare off several attempted home invaders. Therefore, he was a light sleeper, and any kind of noise would instantly wake him up and make him do rounds around the apartment to make sure there were no intruders. After the second or third break-in, the gangs learned to stay away from the apartment due to his reputation of becoming Rambo to fight them off. He and his roommates had an old, really freaking old fridge that had a light that did not work and came with the purchase. This is important to the story. The apartment building was also built in the 1960s, but had been converted to a sort of loft house with only one apartment room available for rent. Roommate and him split it into 2 living quarters, with a tiny kitchen, bathroom, a basement, and a barred front door with broken glass. The kitchen was directly next to the bedroom and the walls were paper thin. One night, he heard someone moving around in the kitchen. Of course, he snatched up his hunting knife and investigated. The fridge door was open and the light was on. An old woman wrapped in a shawl was bent over examining the contents. My dad yelled, "Hey!" She turned and snapped. The light went off. She vanished, and the door of the fridge suddenly slammed shut. To this day, he has no clue who she was or what she was. Not during a night shift, but on a bleak, stormy day with just as much spooky potential as one. I was alone in the kitchen, sandwich shop, when I spotted a customer in the lobby. Never heard him come in. Door is pretty squeaky and closes hard, so it's difficult to miss someone walking in even without a bell like most businesses have. His back was to me, facing the opposite wall, standing in the middle of the room. I never saw his face, but he seemed to be an older man, 70s. I greeted him with a hello, but he didn't reply. The stillness in the way he stood there, coupled with how he was facing away from me in a dim lighting. It had been hot and humid out before the storm, so we had minimal lighting on to try and keep cool. Gave me kind of a Blair Witch vibe in retrospect, but at the time I waved it off as him looking out the window or something, while he decided what he wanted. Plus I'm used to rude customers, so I wasn't surprised by him ignoring me. I turned away to wash my hands so I'd be ready to throw together his sandwich once he was ready to order. I'd had my back turned 20 seconds, yes, this was during COVID, so I was counting. And when I turned back around, he was gone. Again, I never heard the heavy door open or close, and the only other door he could have left through was close enough to me that I would have absolutely noticed. He never came back, and I don't see why anyone would come into a sandwich shop for 30 seconds just to stare at the wall opposite the front counter and then leave without a word. Also, now that I think about it, he didn't even look wet, and it was pouring outside. So I'm not really one to believe in ghosts, but silent old man with Blair Witch vibes plus dark and stormy day plus appearing, disappearing without a sound equals I definitely saw a ghost that day. Not necessarily night shift, but I used to work in a bar that was next door to a funeral director's. Not only was it next door, it had actually previously been part of the funeral director's, and the welcome slab outside had the director's name and year carved into it, like Ferguson's 1891. in Scotland, so we were only open until 1 a.m. at the latest. There were a few different events, nothing uber scary, but the whole vibe of the place when you were on your own was so unsettling. Nighttime routine would mean one staff member would be downstairs counting tills, and the other would be in the venue cleaning everything. I remember one night I was polishing the bar taps, and I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection. I spun around so quickly to no one being there and messaged my coworker to come upstairs. She called out for me from the bottom of the stairs before she'd even gotten my message, and when we reunited, she said she'd heard me coming up and down the stairs multiple times. The weirdest part is she was counting cash 2 levels down from me, and I hadn't been down 1 set of stairs at all, never mind 2. This place also had 2 sets of stairs that led nowhere, and in our wine cellar we had a massive old iron door that had a wheel to open it. I'm not sure what it was for, but the wine racks were over it, anyway, preventing you from trying to open it. In the girls' toilets, there was a bit that looks like it'd be a window, but was boarded up and below street level. It was just a board over a sharp 13-foot drop in some weird underground alleyway thing. One night after locking up, we stayed behind for a couple of drinks, and one of my coworkers was dared to jump down. She did, was fine, and we were all laughing. She went so quiet all of a sudden and started freaking out, asking us to help get her out. When we did, she was just quiet and went home, and a few days later eventually said she felt someone touching her arm. Not a gentle brush, but like someone had put their palm on her forearm and wrapped their hand around it. In college, I worked a night shift from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. In the middle of it, I would often take a break to run home and eat there. I lived on the top floor of an 11-story high-rise at the time. The building was built in the early 1920s and had a reputation of being haunted. When I had ghostly run-ins during my break, it was always the same. I would leave my apartment on the 11th floor and hit the lobby floor button. If an off-ride was going to happen, the elevator would stop at the 7th floor. When the doors opened on the 7th floor, no one would be there. Once the doors closed, instead of opening at the lobby, the elevator would drop down to the basement level, which required key access. When the doors opened in the basement, the doors would open and reveal a long dark hallway with dim green lights. At the other end of the hall, the energy would feel completely off, and I would clench my eyes shut until the doors closed and the elevator took me back up to the lobby. After looking into the history of the building, I found several accounts of hauntings. Apparently, in the early history of the building, several prostitutes were found dead in the basement. I then thought that perhaps there actually was someone or something entering the elevator on floor 7. I worked as an overnight valet at a hotel that was converted from an abandoned late 1800s, early 1900s steel factory. To put it mildly, the place was a monument to human suffering. On Sundays, we were usually around 30% capacity, so most of the rooms were completely empty. Most Sundays, I would walk down to the lot around 2 a.m. and various curtains would be open and closed. And when I came back up, several of them would have changed from where they were when I left. I can think of multiple times where we had entire hallways completely empty, but the curtains would still change while I was checking the cars. Guests would regularly complain that the people above them were stomping around, and before we would call the room above them to ask them to quiet down, we would check to make sure it was actually occupied, because there was a 50% chance it wasn't most of the time. We would actually receive less noise complaints on nights where we were actually at capacity. I helped some guests move to another room after the noise woke them up more than once, and when I went back to grab their last bag, I heard it myself. It sounded like a grown man running. We sent someone to check the room and it was empty. We would also get a lot of calls from guests asking if someone had been into their room to clean, despite the Do Not Disturb sign on the door, because their belongings would have been moved. And of course, the curtains would have been moved. Our employee room in the basement was the worst. It had motion-sensitive lights that would turn themselves on. One night in particular, I was making a cup of coffee to take back upstairs when the lights in the bathroom came on. Then the motion-sensitive sink. Then the motion-sensitive toilet. Then the lights turned back off. Didn't go back downstairs alone for a while. The absolute creepiest part of the hotel was one of the first buildings constructed, though. They kept the original wooden floors, and they creaked like crazy when you walked on them. I stopped running errands to that building. It wasn't part of my job, but I did it sometimes for the tips. After we received 4 calls from one of the rooms that was supposed to have been unoccupied. When I went to unplug the phone so we would stop getting what we were writing off as a short in the phone, I couldn't get into the room. The door rejected my card, the manager's card, and the override card. Just as I was getting into the elevator, I heard the electric lock open up. I went back and the card let me in. The phone wasn't even on the hook, and after giving a quick look around, the room was empty. I quit after a few months. Don't regret it. Yes, and I have no explanation for it. It was around 11 p.m. I had just finished feeding some kittens and was singing along to the radio to keep myself awake and do a little dance to one of the dogs in a neighboring cabin who was wagging her tail at me. I work in an animal home and was in the vet clinic at the time that often had both cats and dogs in theater cages in the same room, when I heard a very, very distinct growl. It wasn't the little dog, as it came from behind me, and she was the only dog in the vicinity at the time. Plus, I was looking at her when I heard it, and there was no lip movement, no teeth shown, nothing body language-wise at all. But I know she heard it because her hackles went up. I asked her if she growled, and she wagged her tail harder, and I bent down to put my hands up against the bars so she could nuzzle, and she was then fine and relaxed. I thought maybe our aircon unit had crapped out, so I went to the corner and switched it off and went to switch it back on, but leaned over to switch it off the radio for the night when I heard it again, this time louder, very distinct, coming from behind me again, but from the opposite corner. Again, not the little dog, as she was in my full view the whole time. At that point, all the hairs on my neck stood up, and I bolted out of there as quickly as I could. I went into the next building and continued with my night until my shift colleague started, but couldn't help thinking about that growl. I know it sounds carry at night, but there were no other dogs nearby at the time, and our main building, where our kennels are, is soundproof, so the neighbors don't complain. I really didn't think anything of it until my shift colleague went out for a smoke around 2 hours later and said he felt like there was somebody watching him the whole time and got a really strong smell of wet dog when he was out there. My dad used to work as a maintenance supervisor at an apartment complex. The complex had about 5 buildings, all connected by parking lots and drives. Surrounding the complex was a few side streets that would connect one from the south and one from the west. To the north was a plaza, and northeast or east was an open field. But just to the west, between the 2 side streets, was a series of grassy knolls that were marked as protected land. My dad had told me that he suspected that the complex was built on Native American burial ground, or directly next to one at the very least. He wasn't told this in a matter of fact, but he began to believe it more and more the longer he worked there. Mind you, at the time, we lived in one of the apartment buildings in that complex. One time, we were chatting after he got home from work, and he told me he was a little shaken up about his day. Apparently, when he was painting one of the vacant apartments, he got a really weird feeling, like he was being watched. He shrugged it off and went on with his business. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw something, but couldn't tell what it was. I guess he slowly turned around to see a little Native American girl with a noose around her neck, hanging from the ceiling. My dad is a shorter guy, but he said the bottom of her feet were around his eye level, so around 5.5 feet. I asked more, but to be honest, I don't remember much. This happened maybe 10 or so years ago, and I was young. I just remember he told me he would see or hear other things, like objects moving on counters, hearing knocks and doors opening or moving, children laughing and playing. Spooky stuff.